On final passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an issue of very high interest to my constituents, and in response to my good colleague from Philadelphia County, I would say I've had thousands and thousands of conversations with my constituents about this very topic. And that's one of the reasons why I took the time to try to find out for myself, it's an important issue in my area. What is the best way to deal with this? I think it's so important that we have to look at this topic objectively. Look at the facts. Pennsylvania labors under the second largest legislature in the country, behind New Hampshire's 424-seat part-time legislature. So we have the largest full-time legislature in the United States. And we're certainly not the largest state. And our constituents know this. So if on that fact alone, they're suspicious, and they think we should have a smaller legislature. So I've spent the last almost 3 years now visiting some other state legislatures to see how they do it. I've visited 14 different state legislatures, a diverse set of them, to study our various systems and talk to our colleagues in those legislatures and ask how it works in their state. And you've all had the chance to meet at least one of those colleagues, because we had him here a couple weeks ago, Senator Sam McCann from the state of Illinois. He represents Abraham Lincoln's original district. We had him here as a guest to go over to the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address, but he was one of the colleagues I met when I visited the Illinois state legislature. So I say we look at some of these neighbors of ours and compare ourselves to them. Let's start with Ohio. Ohio is nearly equivalent to us in population. They're the seventh most populous state. We're the sixth most populous state. And they govern with a legislature, with a state house of 99 people in their state house. They represent roughly 120,000 people, residents per representative. So a much smaller legislature is certainly not impossible for a state our size or near our size. And when I visited that legislature, it was amazing just how it functioned. It was much less chaos like we see on the floor here right now. Much more sincere debate. Members listened quietly as other members spoke. They paid attention. They were polite. It's one of the first things I noticed when I came to this legislature. I was like, what's all the chaos going on? Is anybody even listening? Are we changing any minds when we come up here? But in their legislature of only 99, where there's so few people there, they actually listen to the debates. They actually listen to their colleagues. You can also examine the state of Illinois, which is the fifth largest state by population, just ahead of us by about 100,000 people. Slightly larger than us in size. They're 55,000 square miles. We're 46,000 square miles. And yet, they operate with 118 members in their state house. Far fewer than us. And then there's the state of New York. The third most populous state. Slightly larger than us in size also. New York is about 54,000 square miles as opposed to our 46,000 square miles. But they have 19 millions of people compared to our 12.7. Yet they operate with 150 House members in a part-time legislature. So I ask you to compare those things. And for my rural colleagues who contend that a smaller legislature would hurt the rural districts, well, I represent a rural district too. I represent two counties, one's rural, one's suburban. And I would offer the example of the state of Montana. I got to visit the Montana state legislature because my son was stationed out at Great Falls, Montana. So when I went out there to visit him, I made sure I made an appointment to go by the legislature and tour the legislature and talk to their representatives. And they're really an appropriate example of this rural-urban argument that we have. Montana is the fourth largest state by size, 147,000 square miles, but just under 1 million people in 56 counties. And a quarter of their population is concentrated in 4 cities. very rural state. Yet they operate with 100 representatives in their state house and 50 senators. And I visited their legislature and I talked with their senators and their representatives, and they feel that rural Montana is well represented in that state. Far bigger than ours. Far bigger districts than ours would be. 3 times the size of our districts. Now, other colleagues contend that Pennsylvania is a diverse state, they say. That's why. It's different. We're so diverse. Well, that's true. They're right. We are diverse. But it's interesting when you go to the other states and you talk to them, they say the same thing. They say, well, we're a diverse state too. We're very diverse. That's why we're so special. We're uniquely diverse. Let's look at our neighbor again. Let's look at Ohio. They're a rural state with concentrated populations in large areas such as Cleveland and Cincinnati. Or look at our neighbor Illinois, more populous than us, slightly bigger than ours. They're a rural state with a large concentration in Chicago and their surrounding counties. Yet both operate effectively with a smaller legislature, much smaller legislature than ours. Now some colleagues actually say we should have a larger legislature. We're not just the right size, we should be bigger. The larger the better. Voice of the people. But when you travel up to New Hampshire, remember I said the largest legislature in this country is New Hampshire's 424-seat legislature? When you travel up there, you learn that each legislator has a smaller voice. Imagine, there's 424 of them sitting there. They don't even have desks. They sit in what's like an auditorium, a school auditorium, all sitting there scrunched up with no desks. More people means fewer, you have a smaller voice. The leadership runs that legislature. Each individual legislator is almost neutered in such a large body as they have in New Hampshire. Finally, my colleague from Delaware County, he touts the fact that the number we represent is small enough so that we can each personally touch every constituent. And he's right. And he does that. I know that, and I respect him for that. But I've done that too, because I've knocked on all those doors myself. And that's how I talk to those people about why they're so concerned about the size of our legislature. But under this bill, our districts would remain about the size, still reachable by a representative that's willing to work at it. Some of us already represent districts nearly that size, in the 70,000s, because of the discombobulation of the redistricting. There's not much difference, really, in that few number to represent a few more. There's nothing magical about the number 203. As we learned last year when we had that symposium across the street, that number was arbitrary. What we can safely say is that an effective number lies, when you study this and you study all the other state legislatures, you can say an effective number for any state lies somewhere between 100 and 175. Now, we can learn from Ohio and Illinois and New York and many other states, but we don't have to be them. I understand that. We're Pennsylvania. We want to have our own way. We can set our own standard within those guidelines. That's why I said this number 153 is pretty good. It's a pretty good number for our state, for the size of our state. And still others argue that, well, it's not worth doing this because not much money will be saved. And that isn't the biggest argument. I've heard it said, my good colleague from Northampton County, that people said that's the most important argument. It's not. We all know that not much money will be saved, maybe in the tens of millions, certainly not in the hundreds of millions. It's not about how much money will be saved. It's like the speaker said, it's the larger argument is about the effectiveness of the legislature, not just the cost savings. You know, there's an old saying in government, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping the old ones. That's the problem we always face. And keeping our current system is one idea we truly need to escape. Now, the people, they want this, but they don't believe we can do it. They don't. And they're fed up with government. You've heard it said. You know it when you go home. The people tell you that. They're fed up with government. Why? Because they're tired of telling us up here what they want, and then we don't do it. That's what happens. That's what they say over and over and over. They say, we'll never vote ourselves out of office. You people are all career politicians. You'll never vote yourself out of a job. They say, we're full of greed up here. This house is full of greed. They say, we're full of avarice and selfishness, even pride. And in some sense, they're right. But remember, just last session, we proved them wrong, and we passed this bill. And we showed them that there are those among us that are willing to make that sacrifice and do what's right. Look, we need to lead by example. We often ask our citizens to do more with less. We can do this too. We can do more with less. The people want it. We should do it. I ask you to vote yes on House Bill 1234. And Mr. Speaker, I also, from Young and I, my wife and I, we wish you all my colleagues, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair thanks the gentleman.